Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for this exciting webinar. We will be starting shortly, but before we begin, I'd like to give you a little bit of background on Biltmore Capital Advisors. We are an independent SEC-registered investment advisor based in Princeton, New Jersey, and Boca Raton, Florida, and we've worked with families across the country. You can see some of our financial planning and asset management services we offer right there on your screen. Also, before we start, I'd like to take a moment and talk to you about the complimentary portfolio review we are offering for a limited time. We're going to be conducting in-depth complimentary portfolio reviews based on our outlook and views from the market. The review will include a Biltmore Capital analyst and member of the investment committee inputting all positions. And you can see right there on your screen some of the items we will be reviewing in the complimentary review. There's a couple ways you can schedule your review. You'll see right there on your screen. You can call 888-391-4663, or there's an email there as well, and it's mhoyer@biltmorecap.com. We look forward to hearing from you to schedule that review. And now it's on to our Bitcoin presentation. So as Bitcoin trends in the media, it seems society has many unanswered questions. Biltmore Capital is here to make sure we can address any inquiries and concerns you may have about this new fad. We will be discussing the facts, explore the economics of cryptocurrencies, and address how this can affect your economic future. If any questions arise, which we hope they do, please type them in and we will answer them at the end. Our presenter today is Dr. Donald R. Chambers, Chief Investment Officer of Model Portfolios here at Biltmore Capital Advisors. Dr. Chambers is a noted author and speaker on finance and investments. He has published 5 books and over 50 articles. I'll now turn this over to Dr. Chambers to begin the presentation.
Thank you, Thalia, and thank you, folks, for joining this webinar. I hope we're going to have some fun today. It's a difficult topic. It's a very abstract topic, and what I'm going to try to do in this webinar is to give some analogies that might help us get our minds around these very complex issues. So the questions we're going to explore today: what is Bitcoin? What makes it have value? How is it related to this thing called the blockchain, and what is the blockchain? And probably what a lot of you are thinking about, and that is Bitcoin likely to be a good investment? So let's get started with some quick disclaimer here. I'm just really here to teach. I don't have any interest or desire to promote or disparage the cryptocurrency. Bitcoins and other cryptocurrencies can be used to do illegal things like buying drugs or circumventing taxes or circumventing government surveillance. I don't want to get into that. I'll mention it briefly at the end. And for purposes of full disclosure, I own 2 millibitcoins. That's 2/1000th of a Bitcoin. And I've owned it for about 3 years, and it's worth about $20 now. What is a Bitcoin? And a brief overview: it's the biggest and most famous cryptocurrency. Cryptocurrencies are simply electronic mediums of exchange, kind of like money. Bitcoin is therefore one of the electronic mediums of exchange. And Bitcoin's ownership, like most cryptocurrencies, is stored, updated, and kept in the cloud using blockchain technology. And when we say the cloud, all we're talking about is all the computers in the world that are those that are networked together and those that have information accessible from them. So that's what the cloud is, and that the ownership record of Bitcoins is stored out in all throughout the world on an awful lot of computers. So this gives a little idea of what the price of Bitcoin or the value of Bitcoin has been lately, and it's moved so quickly lately that it's hard to keep up with it. If you look at in the kind of upper left panel here where it lists the dates on the left, what I'm trying to show here is how often Bitcoin has gone up in price tenfold. So it started in near October 2009, and and I'm not picking exact prices here, but it was trading for a while in the range of about 1/10 of a cent. And within a year, well less than a year, it had gone up to being worth a penny. That's the next line. And then within another year, it had gone up to being worth tens of pennies, 10, 15 cents. And I'm not just looking at one-day spikes here. I'm kind of looking at trading ranges. So each one of these lines is a tenfold increase. And if you go through these lines, there's actually 7 tenfold increases, counting since I initially drafted this presentation. It's now gone from being worth $1,000 to being worth over $10,000. Lately, it's over $12,000. So that's 7 tenfold increases. If anybody's counting or doing the math, that's a 10 million-fold increase. If you put $1 into this as an investment in October 2009, it would be worth $10 million. Then I have a picture of a tulip over here, and that's a reference that some of you might recognize to a historic event that occurred in Holland, where tulip bulbs became so ridiculously priced that and they eventually collapsed. I will point out, though, that even though this has been a huge rise, if you look carefully at this section, and I just listed a section from earlier this year, it went from $3,000 down to $2,000. That's a drop of 33%. It went from almost $5,000 to about $3,300, about a 30% drop here. So I note this, that even during this meteoric rise, and as recently as twice this year, owning a Bitcoin can lose you a lot of money in a hurry. And when we see such an incredible increase, on the one hand, it's really hard for me to say, oh, this is the stopping point, it won't happen again. I talked about Bitcoin a lot in the past few years, and I didn't expect it would go up, 100-fold or 1,000-fold since I previously talked about it. It could go up another 100-fold. I think it's extraordinarily unlikely, but I also think it's very likely that this could fall tremendously in value, not just in the short run, but in the long run. So let's try to get into some of the underlying ways that it works to maybe get a better handle on whether it's something that you want to commit money to or simply enjoy watching other people do that. So is this a Bitcoin? No, this is just a piece of paper, but it holds the private key. And I'm going to use the word password a lot. The private key is like a password that you know that nobody else is supposed to know. Whoever knows that private key is the person that owns the Bitcoin. If they're the only person who knows that password, then you are the owner of that Bitcoin. And that Bitcoin, that password is stored. It's not here, but it's stored on this piece of paper. And a television reporter was given a Christmas gift about 3 years ago of Bitcoins, $20 worth of Bitcoins, and he showed this piece of paper on the television screen, and some people reportedly were able to capture a screen image of it, take the password off of that piece of paper, because that's all that piece of paper is doing. That piece of paper is not a piece of magic. It's just holding the password. And basically what he was doing here was showing his password to the entire world. And somebody quickly took that password and stole his money. And of course, being Bitcoin, you can't catch the people that do something like that. Now, we could talk about that later as to how that happened. So kind of one of our first lessons in Bitcoins is it's owning a Bitcoin is owning a password, and if you show that password to somebody else, you've as good as given up your ownership of that Bitcoin. So here's an example of what a password might look like, and that looks really strange because it's using all sorts of characters to collapse a lot of information into a character string of about 40 characters. So this is a hypothetical password that you would have to own a Bitcoin. And how would you store that? Well, there's 4 main ways. You could store it on paper, like I just talked about. You could keep it on your cell phone or your computer. You could keep it on a dedicated electronic device that you just have for the purposes of Bitcoin storage. Or you could keep it with a firm that specializes in storing and helping you to use Bitcoin or another cryptocurrency. can someone guess your password? We all struggle with password changes, and the answer is essentially no. There are so many potential passwords. If we go back to this password, it looks like, wow, maybe you could guess that. Our mind cannot fathom the number of passwords that are potential in a character string that long. I put this picture here for a number of reasons. One is that's a picture of me, and it shows how much fun I have when I go to the beach. You can tell by the way I'm dressed, I'm not really a party guy. That's my daughter, and I hope this will be my son-in-law. But the real point of the picture here is to think about this sand. And this sand is wonderful Gulf sand, with very finely textured. And you can hold millions of these grains of sand in just a cubic foot. But I want you to think about these huge beaches, maybe 100 feet wide and 10 feet deep, and that they go on for miles and miles and miles. As far as you can see in this picture is probably less than 100 trillion grains of sand. So guessing something that has, if you were to get, try to find the grain of sand that I was thinking about, think about how unbelievably hard it would be to guess that, which grain of sand I'm talking about, when there's 100 trillion grains of sand in these miles of beach. But these passwords are not just 100 trillion different potential passwords. It's, as I show down here at the bottom of the screen, it's 100 trillion times 100 trillion times 100 trillion. So guessing a password would be like finding the unique grain of sand on 100 trillion beaches, like a beach like this, 100 trillion beaches on 100 trillion planets and 100 trillion galaxies and 100 trillion universes. It's just unfathomable that anybody could guess it. And as I say here, if you had 1 trillion computers working at 1 trillion calculations per second for 1 trillion years, you wouldn't even begin to have a 1 in 100 trillion chance of guessing the password. The electricity, the cost of electricity is prohibitive. I've spent a lot of time dwelling on this point, but this is really one of the essential points of Bitcoin, is the way that through this cryptology you're able to protect information. Nobody can guess it. So owning a Bitcoin is owning a password, and I like to give an analogy here that it's like knowing the combination to a safe, like a hotel safe. I think we've all seen these hotel safes, and what you do when you go in is you put in a password that only you know and close the safe, and ignoring management here, you're the only person that can get into that safe because you're the only one that knows that password. So that's the same thing with a Bitcoin. When you get a Bitcoin, you get a password, and you're the only one that knows that password. So why would that be valuable? Well, it is valuable. One of those, having a safe like that when you're visiting a hotel, does have value to you. It's a space that can hold something, and it's a space that only you can own. So even though it's an empty space, it's valuable. The question becomes, can I sell that space to somebody else? And the answer is, it's really easy. You simply sell the code. So let's use an example here. This is a little artwork I threw together of we're on a public beach again, and think about a big row of lockers here, or safes, and let's imagine that, even though the picture doesn't show it, that they're the sort of electronic safes that you have in a hotel room. And let's imagine that you happen to own, or I'll make it me, I happen to own the password, the code, to get into locker number 128. Now this is actually an important detail that I'm throwing in here. Locker number 128 identifies a specific locker, of course, and in the terminology of Bitcoin, that's a public key. Everybody sees locker 128, but I'm the one that knows that the password that I'm talking about belongs only to locker number 128. And you might say, well, somebody could guess it, and we go back to that issue that I was talking about, and that is that there are so many potential numbers in this system that nobody could guess which one I happen to have the password to. So here we are with the example. I know the code to get into locker number 128. Nobody else knows it. So let's suppose a guy named Joe comes along and he offers me $5 for my ownership of that safe. How can I sell him the ownership of the safe? And the answer is actually pretty easy. I know the password. Let's say I put in the code 1234. So I agree to sell that code to Joe for $5. We go over next to the safes. He checks. I give him the password of 1234. He gives me the $5. At the same time, he's checking to make sure that that password works. The password works. He's happy. I take the $5. I leave. The deal is done. That's how Bitcoins work. It's when you electronically connect with somebody, they give you some money, or maybe they give you a car or something in exchange, and you give them the password. They verify that that's the password that works, and then that person changes the locker number, and he changes the private key. He enters his own code, just like if Joe bought this safe from me. But when he opens it, he's going to put, and then closes it, he's going to put in a new password, and that's the password that just he knows. I can't use that safe anymore. He's the only one can use it. So I hope that gives us this visual of how, by trading Bitcoins, what we're really doing is giving people passwords, and then they set new passwords, and these are passwords that nobody could guess. How do you actually do it electronically in the case of a Bitcoin? Well, I got my 2 millibitcoins as a gift. I was at a conference talking to somebody about Bitcoins, and to make it real to me, he asked me to take my smartphone. I downloaded an application. He emailed me some Bitcoins. I clicked on it, and in my cell phone I had an application to handle Bitcoins, and it registered that I now had these 0.002 of a Bitcoin, and it set up a new password for me, and I now have a private key that looks like they're usually visualized for us with these QR codes, and that's not a real one. It's not mine. So this makes it very easy for us. These electronic gadgets makes us very easy to exchange these incredibly long passwords with each other. A very easy way, rather than using your cell phone and an app to buy Bitcoins or sell Bitcoins, is to go to a website that specializes in providing these services. Now, I've illustrated this with the Coinbase. Coinbase is, I believe, is the biggest and most well-known such site. I have no interest in pushing Coinbase, and I don't know if they're reliable, but it is the most popular one. And I actually cut and paste the image here of what the front page of this website looks like. So if you go to coinbase.com, this is the top of the screen that comes up, and you can see you put in your email address, you get started, and it operates very much like other things like PayPal in terms of being very easy for you to use and to buy and sell Bitcoins. There are different ways that you can trade Bitcoins. The website that I just showed with Coinbase is one. You can just do it on your cell phone, and I wanted to show a little bit of what that might look like. You download an application on your cell phone like this, and if you bought 1.93 Bitcoins, this is the sort of screen that you would be looking at. This is called a wallet. When you download an application that allows your cell phone to hold your Bitcoins, obviously hold your passwords, and to trade them with other people, that's called a wallet. Another concept is a vault. A vault is a website like Coinbase that will actually store that information for you. And of course we have to have some concerns about that, but a vault would be electronics being held by somebody else. A wallet is when the electronics are on your cell phone. And to transact with a wallet this looks to me a lot like transacting with PayPal or something else. You just type in amounts to pay, who it's going to, and hit send buttons and things like that. So trading these using a wallet on your cell phone are quite easy. I will tell you that my 2 millibitcoins that I own are on my old cell phone. So it's kind of inconvenient for me, and this is something to think about, is how you store these passwords so that nobody else can get to them, but that you don't lose them. So if something were to happen to me right now, nobody would know that where to find that cell phone or how to sign on to that cell phone. It's kind of tough to keep track of them unless you're really staying on top of this. You can also have dedicated storage devices, and these are pictured over here. So if you're worried about the security of your cell phone, or you're worried about your cell phone becoming obsolete, like mine is becoming, my old one, then you can buy these little electronic devices, and that's another way to store them. What gives a Bitcoin value, or any other cryptocurrency value? And the answer is faith. If people believe that it works, it'll work. If people don't believe that it'll work, it'll have no value. You may think I'm kidding about this. I'm not kidding about this. The only thing that gives a Bitcoin value is that people believe it has value, and if they stop believing it'll have value, it won't have any value. Now that may sound like something you don't want to get anywhere near. You don't want that to be part of your life, but that is a huge part of our life, because that's actually what our money is in the United States. The pieces of paper that we have in our wallet are really kind of like Bitcoins. They have serial numbers on them, just like Bitcoins have public keys and private keys. And when you own this currency, you don't own anything. It has no value other than what other people are willing to believe that it has. And that's what's known as a fiat currency. A fiat currency is something that's not backed by gold or silver. It's just something that has value because people hope or believe that it's going to continue to have value. That works sometimes, and it's failed sometimes. Here's a picture from the early 1900s, I believe it's from Germany, of the money, the worthless money being just swept off the street because it's not worth anything. A more recent example happened in Zimbabwe, where 1 billion of the currency units of the currency are worth nothing. Our money was not always this way. This shows a silver certificate. It says at the top, a silver certificate, and it says at the bottom that it's payable in silver coins to the bearer on demand. That's how our currency got its start, is these pieces of paper were actually receipts of ownership of an actual amount of silver or gold. And then eventually we went off of those standards, and the pieces of paper now are simply fiat money, much like a Bitcoin. Is Bitcoin money? This is a little bit academic here, but I just want to talk about it very briefly. There's three definitions of three qualities of money. Is it a medium of exchange? A Bitcoin, yes, is a medium of exchange. To be money, a currency needs, or a medium, currency needs to be a store of value, maybe even a stable store of value. Well, Bitcoin is a store of value, but it's very volatile. So this is kind of a maybe as to whether Bitcoin satisfies this standard to be considered money. Is it a unit of account? And the answer is no. What a unit of account means is that people think in terms of value. Like when I look at a car, I'll say to myself, oh, that car is worth $15,000. Well, the day that I look at a car, and the day that most people look at a car and say, oh, that's worth a Bitcoin, that's the day it becomes a unit of account. When an average car is advertised on TV and they tell you that it costs 4 Bitcoins, that means that that's a unit of account. When balance sheets and income statements start being printed in Bitcoins, then it'll be a unit of account. It's not a unit of account, so it's not money. And that's important. It's just a medium of exchange. There are 3 complex topics that are important about Bitcoin that absolutely fascinate me, and it's very hard to get good, clear answers to these, so I'm going to use analogies and kind of not go too deep to try to get these 3 points understood. So the first is, how can a Bitcoin transaction be proved to be genuine? In other words, that when somebody gives you a private password, how can you know that it actually works? In the case of that safe at the beach, you went over there and tried it and entered it into the safe and see if it actually opened the safe. But when you have a private key, how can you know that it's legitimate? So then I'm going to talk about what is the blockchain. That's an important concept. And lastly, I'm going to talk about how does the cloud agree on the ledger of Bitcoin. In other words, the record of who owns Bitcoins. When I say who owns them, what transactions have taken place, and what are the hidden passwords within that archive. So how does this electronic ledger, this record that maintains Bitcoin's history, how does that get maintained? So I'm going to briefly touch on these three rather complex topics, and then I'll talk about whether I think it's a good investment. So here's the question. If the password is a secret, how can we know that the password is correct? That's what I was talking about before. And the best analogy that I've been able to come up with about this is think about riddles. And what the Bitcoin technology and blockchain really do is, in a mathematical sense, they have very complex riddles that are so difficult that you can not figure them out, but if somebody gives you the answer, you know it was the correct answer. So let's do a little riddle here. I love this riddle. It says, whoever makes it tells it not, whoever takes it knows it not, and whoever knows it wants it not. And I'm not good at riddles. I don't know if any of you have figured it out yet. I could spend years on this and not figure it out. But the correct answer, or an answer, is counterfeit money. Whoever makes counterfeit money doesn't talk about it. Whoever receives counterfeit money didn't know it was counterfeit, and whoever knows it's counterfeit doesn't want the money. The point that I'm trying to make here is that this is, if you can imagine this occurring with very complicated mathematics, it's a question that nobody can guess the answer to, but if somebody gives you the answer, you can verify that it's correct. That's the key to the cryptology here. Nobody can guess your password, but if you provide that password, they can then look at the public key, the public information, and they can say, ah, yes, that's the password that solves the problem. We never could have guessed it, but it's very easy to verify that it's correct. And there's so many potential passwords that nobody can simply guess the passwords to get the right answer. It's brilliant. You have the key, nobody can figure out what the key is, but once you show that key, they verify, yes, that was indeed the correct password. And then the next owner sets up a new password, and the game begins again. So this verifies and it repeats what I was talking about, that it was counterfeit money. What is the blockchain? The short answer is it's a record of ownership, just like the property records at the county clerk's office. The difference is that the county clerk's office used to keep the records on paper in these big books, and we're keeping this electronic ledger of Bitcoin ownership in the cloud, if you will. So it's an electronic set of who owns what and the passwords. The neat thing about blockchain is its use is not limited to who owns a Bitcoin. It could be used, for instance, and I list some examples down here, of who was the first person to write a poem. If you write a poem, put it in the cloud with blockchain technology, and you can prove that you were the one that 3 years ago first wrote that poem. Or it could be who owns seats to a sporting event, and this is a big one, or who owns a share of stock. A big business in the world is being a registrar of corporate securities. Instead of having a big bank doing that with tons of people and tons of wasted money, we could simply do this with these electronic dots that exist in the cloud and virtually free. The possible uses for blockchain technology. This is this underlying technology that Bitcoin happens to use as its record-keeping system. That underlying blockchain technology, the possibilities are huge. So I'm going to throw out two buzzwords here. One is Ethereum. Ethereum is the software that's publicly available that is being used to facilitate blockchain applications. So that, to me, if people are looking at investing ideas, is something to think about, is that instead of using a particular investing in a particular application like Bitcoin or speculating, to get involved in a company that is creating or using this software to do new applications of blockchain. And the newest application of blockchain that a lot of people are excited about are things called smart contracts. A smart contract is simply a set of instructions that is being maintained in the cloud, that is a contract between two people that automatically executes. It's pretty abstract concept right now, but you could set up an example would be a contract between an insurance company and a person, or between two people, that says that if a certain event happens, such as a flight being canceled, I, Don, will pay Joe $20. And the smart contract could be this contract contained out in the blockchain that automatically causes money to go from me to the other person or vice versa, based upon whether the airline reports electronically that the flight was canceled or not. That's an idea of a smart contract. And there's a lot of smart people out there, pun not intended, who are coming up with ideas as to ways that life could be vastly simplified by simply having these electronic ledger systems execute contracts rather than involving a third party such as a bank or an insurance company that might be very expensive. So how is the blockchain maintained? In other words, how do these electronic registers be kept current? And the answer is it's done with miners. A miner is a person or even a corporation that's using computers to try to keep the blockchain updated as new transactions take place. Well, why would people waste their time doing this? And the answer in the case of Bitcoin is because they actually receive Bitcoins by keeping this ledger constant. And the system that's happened here is described on this page. I'm kind of using up too much time here, so we're going to move ahead. But what happens is that they solve this problem that's set up, kind of like a smart contract. This problem is set up, and it takes a lot of computing power and a lot of luck to be the miner who's the first one to solve the problem. That's called the proof of work. And if you're that lucky miner, you then publish what you think is the perfect updated version of the blockchain that includes all of the transactions that have ever occurred, including the ones since the last one was published. And you have an incentive to make sure that the ledger that you publish, if you win that contest, you want to make sure that the ledger that you publish is accurate, because the next few people that win the contest are going to submit their ledgers, and you don't get that Bitcoin that you're hoping to get. You don't get that Bitcoin unless the people that win the contest the next few times agree that the ledger that you published was correct. So this is called, if you look at this last line here, a trustless system. And what that means is that people have a financial incentive to earn Bitcoins by publishing correct ledgers. And the chance that somebody would make an incorrect ledger by mistake exists, but people wouldn't use that as the foundation for new ledgers because they know it's got an error in it. If you win this contest, you don't want to waste that effort on publishing an incorrect ledger. So there's an incentive in order to earn Bitcoins to make sure that the ledgers that these miners publish are very accurate. So I hope that gives us some idea as to why people are out there. What they're doing when they're mining is publishing accurate ledgers, and they have a financial incentive to make sure those ledgers are accurate, as opposed to a trust system, which is where you trust a major bank such as Bank of New York or Chase to keep an accurate register of securities or transactions. Or the county clerk's office. And if you don't trust the county clerk, you can actually go to court and file a suit that the county clerk was wrong. Those are trust-based systems. You trust the legal system. You trust the banks. This is a system based upon competition and self-interest. Is Bitcoin safe from individual or mass theft? No. In my opinion, it's not. People could steal your cell phone. I'm not saying that it isn't safe. I just don't believe it can be perfectly safe. And especially this idea of public firms, vaults, where they keep the information on who owns Bitcoins. There have been problems in the past, and I worry about it. I not only worry that my information can be stolen, I worry that I could lose the information, like I talked about before, with my old cell phone containing my Bitcoin information. It's not impossible, but it's difficult, in my opinion. I guess I'm a very, I want to be real sure with my major amounts of money that they're safe. So here we get to, should you invest in the Bitcoins? And lots of people have made an unbelievable amount of money in Bitcoins. And it might continue. It might be that 2-3 years from now, I do another webinar, and instead of it being up 10 million fold, it's up 100 million fold or 1 billion fold. But I think it's very likely that it's going to eventually go back to zero. And I want to talk about that for just a moment. Why would Bitcoin continue to have value? And I think that ultimately, Bitcoin has to offer something unique, and it does. It's the most trusted currency so far. But maybe a more trusted method will come along. Maybe something will happen and somebody will be able to hack the whole system and break it down. Some experts say that can't be done. I wouldn't bet much money on it. I think that ultimately the purpose to Bitcoin is what I alluded to at the beginning. It's a way to exchange money that the government doesn't see. Maybe it's just because you don't want the government knowing your business just because you're a private person. Or maybe it's because you're doing something illicit like avoiding taxes, evading taxes, or buying drugs or something like that, or hiding money. So I think that ultimately that's what drives the value of cryptocurrencies. I could be wrong. It could be that it's just a more cost-effective method than printing bills like the U.S. Treasury, like the U.S. mints print. But I personally think that a lot of these cryptocurrencies are going to collapse. Bitcoin, I think, is the least likely to collapse, but it's still likely that it's going to collapse, in my opinion. I think that cryptocurrency speculation is okay if you're dealing with a small amount of wealth. If you gave me the choice between saying, should you put $100 into Bitcoins or $100 into the slot machines at the casino, I think you're probably better off putting your money into Bitcoin. But I wouldn't do either. I don't speculate unless I have a material edge in the game. I'm pretty conservative that way. So a lot of people have lost a lot of money having their Bitcoin stolen, but most of them have made a fortune. I think that era is pretty well over, but I could be wrong. And I would urge people that if you're considering getting involved in Bitcoin, just do it with a small amount. And that is all I have to say. And I think at this point, I'd be happy to try to answer some questions. I hope that the information was helpful so far.
Thank you so much for that excellent insight, Dr. Chambers. Yeah, as Dr. Chambers said, we'll now conduct a short Q&A session to address any of the questions that you may have. Throughout the week, I've had a few people email me some of their questions. So I'll start going through some of those as you all start to type your questions there. The first one, I often read headlines about Bitcoins being stolen in the past. Has Bitcoin fixed this problem?
Yeah, the problem wasn't actually, it's a good question. The problem actually wasn't Bitcoin. The problem was the people that were storing, the organizations that were storing the information. So if you decide to store your passwords with a vault, with a third party, that's who the fault lied with. That wasn't a problem with Bitcoin. That was a problem with the firms that were storing it. It would be like me owning some gold bars and keeping them in a bank, and then the bank gets robbed. Well, the problem wasn't with gold. The problem was with the banks. And of course, these firms claim that they've solved the problem. but I think it's one of these things that they solve the old problems, but then the thieves come up with new ways to beat the system. So once that comes back to my concern that it's going to be real difficult, in my opinion, to have long-term storage of Bitcoin. It's risky. I guess that's what I should say.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Chamber. The next question, what are your thoughts on what will be the next Bitcoin?
I think Bitcoin will be the premier cryptocurrency for a long time. I think that somebody might come along with a better technology, but I think Bitcoin has the first mover advantage, and that's what people have a lot of faith in. And unless Bitcoin were to, the system were to break down, I think it'll always be Bitcoin. But I would steer my attention towards the applications of the blockchain technology to things other than cryptocurrency, and that's this Ethereum that I was talking about. Ethereum is not a company; it's a approach to solving problems using the blockchain. There are some companies that are using Ethereum to try to make money for their shareholders, and I don't have any one that I'd recommend in particular. I think the biggest is NVIDIA. I'm not sure even how to pronounce it, but I would head in that direction if I were going to do that research. But once again, I don't think I have this unique ability to pick out that company that's going to be successful. So I'd rather own a diversified portfolio myself.
Okay, got it. Next question here. What kind of businesses are accepting Bitcoins now?
What kind of businesses are doing what?
Are accepting Bitcoins now? Are any businesses accepting Bitcoin?
Right. It's a good question. Years ago, there was a Subway sandwich shop not far from where I lived that accepted Bitcoin. I really don't come across too many businesses that accept Bitcoin, where you could go in with your cell phone, your wallet, your Bitcoin wallet, and show them your the way that we transact with Bitcoins is you show them your QR code, and they take a picture of it, and then they give you whatever it is you're buying, and the transaction gets memorialized in the blockchain, and it's over. I think the main way for us to transact with Bitcoins is to go through a website like Coinbase. Thank you.
Okay, and if the only reason to buy a Bitcoin is to sell it at a profit, isn't it a Ponzi scheme that will collapse someday?
Well, that's quite literally the billion-dollar question. It may turn out in retrospect to have the result of a Ponzi scheme, but I think it also has the potential that with this first mover advantage, Bitcoin will continue to be the most trusted cryptocurrency, will continue to go up in value, but that needs to be weighed against the chance that it will have a systemic failure, somebody will break it, or that another cryptocurrency will come along with a better system, or that at the current price levels, it might be that even if Bitcoin continues to be the most trusted currency, its price could fall, because once again, its price is based simply on what people think it's worth, and one has to wonder how much value can really exist in that system. So it could collapse, but it could continue going up. I wish if I knew that answer, I'd be real happy.
Okay, Don, and this is going to be our last question for today. What are some of the best white papers you have read and or recommend us to read about cryptocurrency?
Well, that's a good question. I did read a white paper lately, but I'm really it was written by some bankers. I guess the ultimate question there is, how would one learn more about this? And I think the issue in terms of, is it going to be a great investment or a bad investment? You could read various blogs on the web. I really don't have off the top of my head a white paper. I don't have the reference off the top of my head. I'd have to do some digging to find it. But so I'm sorry, I really don't know.
Okay, Don, thank you so much. Okay, and thank you so much for all of your questions. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for today. I had a few people asking if these slides are going to be available, and yes, tomorrow they will be available on our website, and everyone will get an email with a link to watch the presentation again. Please be sure to like and follow us on Facebook at Biltmore CAP to stay on top of all our future webinar events, as well as all industry relevant news. And a quick reminder for you all to schedule your complimentary portfolio review. You can go to our website, www.biltmorecap.com, or you can call our phone number, 888-391-4663. And again, we hope you enjoyed our webinar today. Thanks so much and happy holidays to you all.